Hello, everybody. Mike Donahue here, along with Brian May. Say hi, Brian.
Hi, Brian.
We are coming to you from our basements. Brian, you're in your basement, right? With all that Red Sox
I
stuff in the background.
am in
Oh,
my
good.
basement with all this Red Sox stuff and bicycles and various assorted guitars and other
Nice.
things.
Brian is a very good guitar player and not the guitar player for the band Queen. So, not to be confused. So,
Yeah.
just want to make that clear.
Any,
Thank you guys so much for coming to our podcast. Brian and I have been enjoying these times of getting with you and just talking about some of these tough subjects. I wish we were doing a podcast on bicycles or something more pleasant, but the things that we are talking about are getting into some pretty hairy things. This week is no exception. We have had a tough week, both of Brian and I, digesting what happened to that young lady who, when she was 12 years old, was molested, sexually assaulted on a regular basis by a pastor. Robert Morris has allegedly admitted to having a relationship with this girl. And Brian and I both got to listen to a podcast by Bob Hamp. And it was a great podcast where this former staff member kind of broke down why this happened. I mean, he talked about a lot of things, but what intrigued me was the process in which this did not get this got swept under the rug and just did not get exposed until later on. And so it kind of goes into what Brian and I have been talking about with this person. And we're just going to come out and name this person. I named her in my book, so I'm just going to say her name. Her name is Jeannie Mayo. And I worked for her for 5 years in Rockford. I was under her ministry 5 years before that in Bellevue, Nebraska, and got to see a lot of corruption in my mind, a lot of things that were not right. And so we've been kind of skirting the issue and not saying her name, but I've come to the conclusion that we just need to say it. It's in my book, so it's no secret that that's who we're talking about. And so tonight, Brian, I'm just mad. I'm angry about what I read this week about Robert Morris and this girl. And then there's been a few other big ministry names that have come tumbled down, and it feels like you can't watch TV anymore or get on your phone without seeing more corruption and more pastors stepping down from alleged things that happened to them back in the day, and now they're all coming to light. What's your take on that?
yeah, I should say that I worked for Jeannie at the high school for 6 years, and my wife and I were involved in the youth group for a number of years prior to that and beyond that, and actually stayed in that church for over 3 decades. That's my experience. So my take on all of these things that are coming forth with all of these horrific instances of abuse that we're hearing about in the church world. There's a lot to say here, and we'll probably do several podcasts on this. But one of the things that Mike and I have talked about is Mike mentioned that we've both been pretty angry this week. I can remember when I was first in the church, there was a very strong bias to address you if you were angry, as if you had a problem. And the fact that you were angry meant that you had a problem and you had to deal with that problem, and that you really didn't have anything to say if you were angry, because you had to go deal with that anger problem. Since then, as I've grown and matured and studied, and I really see that anger is a valid emotion that serves us and helps us to set up appropriate boundaries. It helps us to realize when something is wrong. It's kind of the Danger Will Robinson robot impulse in our hearts and our
That's
minds.
dating you, by the way.
It is dating me, but they did reboot it, and so uh, yeah. Anyway, date me all you want. And what happens is when you see things that are wrong, and that emotion signals to you that you should say something or do something about it, and you become angry, and you're in a culture and environment where that anger is seen as, hey, wait a minute, you have a problem, so you don't have anything to say, it effectively shuts you down, and it insulates people like Robert Morris or people in those positions from any sort of criticism, any sort of correction. It's really a mechanism of control.
Right. And the word insulate is interesting because I think that's in that podcast that you and I listened to with Bob Hamp. He really went into that insulation process. And part of it, what he said was that special people who are deemed in the ministry as successful or just untouchable because of their success or because of who they are, their kind of micro fame or micro celebrity status that they have, they almost seem to be able to get away with things that other people wouldn't get away with. Like there's a double standard for people who, who again, who are, have a big name people, that kind of thing. And it seems like that's kind of coming down like that. I don't know if it's God or if it's just the way our society is moving or both, but it seems like there is the end of that. Like God's tired of that. Like we're seeing a lot of ministries be exposed today, and that insulation process is being exposed.
It is being exposed. I think there's a lot of factors that go into that. I think people have more avenues and channels to speak out. And I think in general, in society, it is becoming more and more normative to push back against power in a good way, in a legitimate way, to call power into accountability. And I believe that's what we're seeing in the church is more and more people are feeling emboldened to stand up and to tell their story.
Right.
And I think that rank and file normal people like you and I are beginning to listen to those voices more than we're listening to the people in power who want to control the narrative. Because let's be clear, that's what they want to do. They want to control the narrative. And what should really control the narrative are the facts and the truth of what went on.
Right. Right. I can't tell you how many people have come forward. I mean, I'm not making this up. There's been hundreds of people. Today, I got another parent that called me and said, "Thank you for writing this book." And this is what I saw. This is what came to my mind when I read the book, and all these different things that are being exposed from way back from Bellevue all the way to Atlanta. I wasn't in Atlanta, but there are Atlanta people that are coming forward and saying, with Jeannie, we saw these things and it hurt me in this way. And to be honest with you, Brian, I was part of that insulation process in Rockford. I mean, I know good people that came forward and saw certain things that went, this ain't right. And I was part of that. Like I was part of the entourage that put up a fuss about it. And because it's part of it was I didn't really know it was that bad. And then as I did get to know that it was that bad, I started an exit strategy because I could see that it was really powerful up there to go against that machine, to go against what she was doing, because she had so much power available to her. She had her husband who was a senior pastor, her boss. There was really nowhere to go with any kind of complaint or grievance against her. The people that she put around her, again, I was part of that, were very, very instrumental in keeping her from being touched. And I feel bad about that. I do. I feel
Yeah.
bad that I was part of that. I did get out of it, and I did see the light at some point, but it was bad. It was kind of almost too late.
Yeah, a couple of things on that. I mean, I pushed back, and I pushed back hard at times, but not hard enough. And not only in the years that she was there, but in the years that her successors ran the church. But the the interesting thing is that when Mike began to write this book, when he and I reconnected, um, he would talk to me about an incident that happened at the school, an incident of abuse that happened at the school. And it became clear to us that we knew different facts about that he knew a lot more about it than I did. And it was 30, 35 years later that I learned the whole story of this particular incident. Don't need to go into that right now. But that speaks to how well they controlled the narrative, that over decades, they kept these kinds of things quiet. And so you mentioned, Mike, that there were things that you saw, but there are a lot of things that you didn't see. I think that's both of our experience, that there are a lot of things that we didn't see until now. I also think that it takes time to put the pieces of the puzzle together. And as Mike said, we've talked to people from Bellevue, we've talked to people from Rockford, we've talked to people from Sacramento, we've talked to people from Atlanta. Well, Mike's talked to people from Atlanta. I haven't talked to people from Atlanta. And when you begin to step back and see the narrative of everything that goes on and the progression, you begin to hear the stories, then you reflect back on your own experience, the puzzle pieces come together, and you begin to see more clearly. You come out of the fog and see more clearly.
Right. And actually, you did get to speak to some people from Atlanta, because you and I both were on a Zoom call with some of the main people from her ministry that were not people that was sitting in the cheap seats. They were people that were working for her in positions that I had, assistants, and right up there close to her.
Yeah.
And we had that Zoom call a couple days ago, and it blew me away, the stories that we heard, and the abuse and the pain that they went through. And I guess that's where my anger comes out. My anger comes out in, here are these kids that are willing to do that, right? They're willing. In 2020, they started a website. It was change.org, and they tried to get something done with the Assemblies of God to show them what they saw, what they went through. And they got some headway. I think she got some kind of light discipline where she had to go through counseling or something like that. And that's fine. I don't know if they really did the due diligence to do the research. I got interviewed, but I told them about the sexual abuse cover-ups, and now there's more coming out. Right? There's now I've 5 more since the book was released. 5 more people have come forward and said, she covered this up in my life. And so now that this new evidence has come out, I guess I just want to say to the people that were in the room, the closest people that still seem to be protecting her. I'm not accusing anybody, but I'm going to say their names. I think Rick Lormer, Rod Whitlock, Gary Hoyt, Jeremy DeWert, these people were in my position. They were assistants next to her. They were in some kind of leadership capacity where they got to see how the sausage was made. They got to see the way she worked, the way she operated. And I just want to ask them, I just want to straight up ask them, are you still willing to endorse her ministry? I mean, this is really a serious question to them. Are you seriously going to endorse her ministry now? Or are you going to come forward and go, well, wait, like you said to me just a minute ago, you said, I didn't have all the facts. A couple of years ago, I knew a little bit of things that happened, but then when I found out, and to your credit, when you found out exactly what happened to this girl, you got upset and you went, I don't care what Jeannie Mayo thinks of me. I don't care what other people think of me. I want to know what happened. And you were a man of integrity and truth, and you went after it. I'm asking Rick Lormer. I'm asking Jeremy DeWert, Rod Whitlock, and Gary Hoyt. Are you going to do the same thing? I've got the information. If you want it, just get a hold of me. I'll tell. I've tried with these people. I've tried with Jeremy. I've tried with Rick, Gary, and Rod to say, look, I've got more evidence. Do you want it or not? And they don't want it because they'd rather stick their head in the sand, and they would rather get the benefit of being her friend, which I think is slowly going to come to an end, because when this really does come out, when all of this comes out, and it's going to, one side or the other, whether it's on this side of heaven or the next, it's going to come out, because truth always comes out. Where are you going to be then? And I'm giving you a chance now to get the information and then make a decision. And if you can look at those victims and say it was no big deal, like Jeremy DeWert said to me, oh, it wasn't as bad as you think it is. And Rick Lormer told someone today, finally, that I was on some crusade to hurt Jeannie, which I'm not, by the way. I'm on a crusade to bring truth to light and to bring accountability to power. And that lady is powerful. and she has done a lot of damage. And if you want the proof, give me a call. And you can come on this podcast and you can defend what you know about her, and I'll bring up the facts, and I'll bring the people in that have been hurt, that have been abused, that had cover-ups done on them, and let's compare notes. I dare you to do that.
Yeah, and let's be clear. These are allegations, but they're very credible allegations, and there are people who will substantiate the words of these people who have come forward and said that, yeah, I suffered some of the most serious kind of abuse inside of her ministry that we have talked about. They're credible allegations. And so, yeah, I just want to repeat that, whether it's Gary, Rick, Rod, Lori, please, Jeannie.
Yeah.
If
come on the podcast, Jeannie.
come on
Defend
and
yourself.
let's talk about this. And Mike said
Yeah.
something very important. So I was in my 20s when I was teaching at the school, and the leadership of the church. This was Gary and his wife at that point. Gary's like 8 days older than I am, so we were roughly the same age when a lot of these things began to go down. The incident that I mentioned at the school. That's a heavy burden for a young person who stepped in a position of leadership of a large church. There is a place to say, you know what? I should have done better. I could have done better. Maybe, I don't know if this were the case, but to say I was young, we were afraid, we were confused. We did the best we could, but it wasn't good enough. We should have done more. And to look the victims in the eyes and say that, say, we are sorry. We should have done a better job to protect you. We should have done a better job to make sure that the people involved in this were held to account. We should have done a better job to change the culture so that things like this couldn't happen again. And we should have, we didn't, we're sorry. And in doing that, what you do, and to my knowledge, that hasn't been done.
I've given
Not
them
not to
ample
that extent.
opportunities to do that,
Yeah,
and they have not done that.
yeah. And Gary and Lori, we talked about this on the phone, and I don't think that has been accomplished yet. What that does is it says that the most important thing for us are the people who got hurt, are the victims. Our reputations, our ministries, our denomination, our culture that feeds us and puts money on our tables and all of those kinds of things. None of those things are more important than looking these victims in the eye and saying, I'm sorry, and helping them on their road to healing.
Right.
But what silence says to these victims is just the opposite.
Right.
What silence says is that we care about all of these other things more than we care about you. And so my question is to all of these folks, which side of that do you want to be on? What do you want to say to the victim? If you could sit down and look these people in the eye right now, today, what do you want to say to them?
Right, right. And I challenge you to come on and say that. Say that was no big deal. Say that, that it was one of the guys said, Jeremy said to me, well, I saw some things that were kind of bad, but it wasn't that bad. Okay, well, say that to the victims. Say that to all those people that have been in therapy and have had to work through some serious trauma in their life. And I guess, again, what we talked about at the beginning of this about anger, the Bible says to be angry, but don't sin, right? Or don't let sin invade your anger. Well, sin is selfishness, right? When you're angry for something about somebody else, and that's what I feel. Like I finished this book in January and sat on it for 3 or 4 months, because first of all, writing it for me, getting to see what exactly happened to me from the time I was a child into now, and seeing the whole thing, it was very cathartic for me, very healing. It was great. So I was like, God, I'm good. Like as far as I'm concerned, I get what happened. I have a clear picture of my culpability, of who hurt me, how I hurt myself, all of that stuff, right? And then for 3 months I sat on it and prayed and said, okay, God, do you want? And what happened was I began to get some of the victims coming to me and saying, what happened to them. And then it was like, yeah, it's time to tell the truth. It's in that anger, that anger should go to work for you. Every time I've counseled anybody as a pastor with anger, I've always said, I've never said, don't be angry. I've said, take your anger and do something constructive with it. Don't be selfish with your anger. Do something that's going to make somebody's life better with your anger. Use that energy to help people. And that's what I feel like we're doing here, Brian, is we're trying to help this never to happen again. And, again, listen, with the pushback I've gotten from people as well, she's older now and she's fragile and well, first of all, she's out there doing it still.
Right.
She was in a church a couple of weeks ago in Greenwich, Connecticut. She's going to be in Florida. I don't keep up with her, but I've heard things. And so I know she's out there still. She's teaching her cadre. She is teaching these methods that I think are very destructive. She's still out there doing that.
Right.
A and B, Joe Paterno was in his 80s when the statue came down in Penn State. And it didn't come down because he messed with children. It came down because he allegedly knew that was happening and didn't do anything about it. And that's what I am calling her out on, is that she knew some of these people. I don't know what she's done with her personal life. I'm not accusing her of hurting children. I am asking her to come forward and give account to some of these people that have come forward and said, you put these people back into leadership positions, even though you knew they were harming children. Answer that question, Mrs. Mayo. Answer that question. And those of you that are protecting her, you answer the question too. Okay, Rick, Gary, Jeremy, Rod, Lori, answer that question for me. I want that question answered, and so do a lot of people.
Yeah, I want that question answered. And Mike and I know all of these people, and I think they would all like to think more highly of themselves than to say that they wouldn't want to answer to that.
Started.
Yeah, I'm with you. And there's a face on this for me that I see every time we talk about it. And I right now I feel anger welling up in me as I speak. But there's a young girl, a sophomore, junior in high school, and she was groomed and abused by a teacher who also happened to be a very good friend of mine. Happened right under my nose. And people knew about it. People in authority knew about it, but it was never exposed. It was never. No one ever went to the authorities, which they should have. They broke the law by not going to authorities, I believe, and it was covered up. And in the sense that it was not dealt with correctly, even under the law, and it altered the course of this young woman's life. Undeniably altered the course of this young woman's life. And I see that face and I think, what if things would have been done differently? What if the people that she was told were there to protect her, were there to lead her, that were there to be her mentors, that were there to be her examples? What if those people had actually stood up to do all that and not just covered it up for whatever sake? Sake of their reputation, sake of their ministry, to protect the mothership? I don't know. I can't say what the motive is. I don't know someone else's heart. But what if, instead of her understanding these people as people who should have protected and didn't, if she'd have been able to look at it and said, gosh, you know what? These are great people, and they really helped me. They protected me. They did what they should have done. They treated me with respect and dignity and love, and they cared for me the way all of us should care for every other human being. Her life, I believe, beyond a shadow of a doubt, would be different. And there is more than just one young girl in this. I'm going to, pun intended, in this cadre of victims who suffered under her.
Yeah. I was in a, maybe to close this up, I was in a church service about a year ago. And there was that at that Sunday, I had no idea, but that Sunday they were exposing something that happened in their nursery. There was a worker that took advantage of some kids in this church, and they brought it to the church, and they exposed it. And I sat there, and I tears was streaming down my face, and I didn't know any of the players here. I didn't know any of them. I just loved the fact that they weren't trying to protect the reputation of the church, but they were protecting these kids by telling the church what happened and saying, "Yep, we dropped the ball, but we could have been." I mean, they opened themselves up for criticism for people. Why didn't you do this? What did you have this in place? And all those kind of things. And I know that's probably what they were trying to avoid. What Jeannie was trying to avoid. What some of the leadership in Rockford was trying to avoid when they didn't expose these things that happened. They didn't want the questions. They didn't want to get the bottom line to be hurt in any way, and people to stop tithing. I don't know. Again, you don't want to assign motive. I don't either, but I can't imagine what went into those decisions. But I remember sitting there at that church and thinking to myself, wow, these people are doing it right. They're protecting children, and that's what it's about, man. It's about protecting kids. We're in the ministry. We're in a very important position to protect the vulnerable. That's what Jesus did when that woman that was caught in adultery. He didn't protect the religious people. He didn't protect their reputation. He didn't protect the synagogue. In the bottom line there, he protected her. They left. They got out of there because he was about to expose them. I don't know what he wrote in the sand, but something. I know what you did last summer. I don't know, something like that. But basically, he got them out of there and protected that woman. And that's what it's about, man. That's what ministry is about. It's about protecting the vulnerable. And so one last time before we close up today, I want to give an invitation to those men and women that were in the room that worked for her, that I know saw some things. You look at that camera, you come on our podcast and you tell us that it wasn't that bad. You tell us that I'm on some crusade that hurt her or whatever. And by the way, I want to say this. I have confronted Jeannie Mayo several times. And the last time I confronted her was in my car driving her to the airport in, I'm going to say, about 2003. And I looked at her and I confronted her on some things that she said and didn't say and some things like this. And she couldn't get out of my car because we were driving to the airport. She couldn't get out. So I was on it. And I remember her crying and being really honest about where she was at in her life. And I looked at her and I said, Jeannie, you got to get out of the ministry for a while. Just get out and deal with some of this stuff. I'm not out to hurt her. In fact, I think those people that are enabling her right now that are not calling sin in her life are keeping her in that prison.
Yep.
You're keeping her in that prison. So how dare you tell me that I'm trying to hurt her when you're doing that exact thing? You're hurting her by not telling her the truth. Read your Bible, right? Read your Bible. It says that the deceitful of the kisses of an enemy, but faithful of the wounds of a friend. And yeah, this is hurtful. It is, but in the long run, it's going to save her and save children.
Right. Can I just add something on to the end of that?
Sure.
I agree 100% with what Mike has said. And this podcast, the book, is not about a vendetta. Number one is about people who got hurt and were shut down, enabling them to have a voice, to be able to tell their story, to give them agency back so that they can begin to find a road to healing, so that they realize that it wasn't the victim, it was them. The victim wasn't the one that did anything wrong. It was the victimizers. And two words come to mind. One is courage. The other is integrity. And all of the people, again, we have mentioned here, I know that you like to think of yourself as people of courage and people of integrity. I also think that you like to think about yourself as men and women of God, which all that means is that you reflect the nature of Jesus in your life. This is an opportunity to do that. This is an opportunity to step up to the crowd that wants to stone a woman who has been caught in adultery and to stand on her side against the religious hypocrisy, against the accusers, against the people who want to further victimize her, and say, no, this is where it ends. This is where it ends. Please, for the sake of the people who have been hurt and potentially could be hurt, please do that.
Amen. Amen. I agree. Well, thank you so much, Brian. And I know those of you that are watching this is an intense stuff, but we're playing with live ammunition here. People are getting hurt. And so we want to stop that. And so that's why we're not going to shy back. I'm not going to shy back from telling the truth. Jesus said, don't suppose I came into this world to bring peace. I came to bring a sword. What is who needs a sword? Soldiers. And if anything needs a soldier, it's the truth. Truth needs a soldier. Truth needs a soldier. And so, and those of you that have stood up, not just to her, but other people in the ministry, and you knew something was wrong and you went after it, and you got beat up a little bit, you got accused of things, they gaslit you, turned it on you, and attacked the messenger. You know what? I applaud you. And I say, stay in there, hang in there, keep going. Because in the end, the truth wins. It wins.
Yes, it does.
All right. Thanks, guys. Thank you very much. We'll see you next week. And hopefully we'll get a lighter topic like, I don't know, bicycles. I don't know, something like that. All right. Have a good week.
See you, everybody. Bye.